Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you doing? I am recording this in March, but by the time you hear this, it's going to be May. So how are things going so far this year, and how's the weather? I don't know why I like talking about weather. This is my first episode back with Jen recording after we took a little bit of a break, and you've heard all the episodes from Dr. Gibson. This is a really great episode. I read about a scenario where a couple was seeing a couples therapist, and the wife was a therapist, and they go to a session, and the therapist kind of has this breakdown about how terrible his relationship is. And it created a rupture in the relationship. But what Jen and I talk about is, what are the things that might make it difficult for the couple? The couple decided not to go back and see the therapist, but should they communicate to the therapist or the owner of the practice that the therapist did this? A lot of the therapists that responded where this was posted said to just let it go. The therapist knows what they did. And we talk about the goal of therapy is learning to be uncomfortable. It's not about feeling better. It's about learning to lean into that discomfort and the things that may prevent us from saying what we're thinking, feeling, needing, and how it's the therapist or coach's job to really create safety in the therapeutic relationship. And this is not stuff that we're taught in school. I think this is a beautiful episode. I love being back recording with Jen. I don't think I want to say too much more, but it is an episode that I think will resonate for therapists and for clients and for people that just in general that struggle with asserting themselves and that discomfort that comes up and what may be on the other side of it. So I think I'm going to let you listen to the episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. How am I? Very good question. I am landing, finally, after what feels like weeks of discombobulation.
It has been weeks.
Yes. I've missed you. I've missed recording together.
Well, we've been connecting, but we have not been recording in, I don't know, at least a month, I think.
Yeah, it feels like longer.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I get like move amnesia, even though I just moved a year and a half ago. And now I just moved now. I'm finally settling in and unpacking. And I forget how much work it is and how consuming it can be.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
And I did mean that I missed, recording together. I know it was like, you're like, how could you miss me at all? Like you're in my, I love having you in my everyday.
I feel the same way. It's interesting. I was sharing something about, I don't know, some interaction that you and I had in the HSP group. And one of the people said to the group members, like, does anybody else really know how to do this? And it was about being authentic, sharing, either asking for feedback or something vulnerable, something that you and I do without even thinking about it. And so not today, but I think we should probably talk about that more for the listeners if people are struggling of how do you show up authentically. And I think today's episode touches on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can weave it in. It's hard. It's hard to show up authentically. Sometimes I work with clients who they have a hard time even showing up authentically to themselves.
Right. And
I wonder if that's some of the whole, like, how am I? Like, I don't even know, because showing up authentically can be hard. We're definitely not conditioned to do that. We're conditioned to show up acceptably instead of authentically.
Yeah. Well, to make people comfortable. It also makes me wonder too, if we need to dial back maybe some of what we're doing, or that maybe the skill set that you and I have, maybe you and I are at the advanced course, and maybe we need to talk about the beginning course. It's more accessible for people. I don't know. I just think it's something to consider.
I know something that was like a big kingpin for me in that was, and I know I've talked about this before on the podcast, I spent a lot of time trying to release self-defensiveness and that need to protect that. In a lot of cases, it's that like that acceptability facade right? That if I didn't have to defend myself because I could be humble and be human, then it made a lot of other things easier with showing up vulnerably.
I sometimes wonder if there's even a step before that, and I don't mean to say that disrespectfully to you. What I often see with clients is if they have an experience that they can say how they feel or show up authentically, well, I guess maybe your part does come first. That why would they even want to do it? Because they haven't ever had the experience of being received, having their feelings or their thoughts received with love and acceptance. Why would you even want to open up? Because most of us have these defenses because it kept us safe and it was a survival mechanism. So why would I want to tell you how I'm feeling? Because the chances of you trampling on me, I haven't had any other experience. And so it feels really risky. And the dysregulation that may happen for me in doing that feels like it's not even worth the risk.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think for a lot of people, some of the first times that they're met with curiosity, compassion, stuff like that could be in therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah. Let's give some context to what we want to talk about, because I think this all weaves in together.
Okay.
So in an online forum that I'm in for therapists, I saw this post. I'm so concerned that I'm going to offend therapists that are listening, or I'm going to be offensive to people that struggle with being more assertive. And so I just want to name that may be a possibility. So if that happens, shoot me an email and tell me that I pissed you off. So the story that I saw was, let's just say there's a therapist. Her name is Mary. Her husband's name is John. They decide to go to marriage counseling and they see Bob, the therapist. Now, Mary's not crazy about Bob as a therapist, but John wanted to see a male therapist. He believed that a male therapist would align with him more. So because they were in marriage counseling, Mary just goes along with it. Therapy's going along fine. I guess one night they get to therapy and they all arrive at the same time. So it's very clear which vehicle. I'm so afraid that the therapist supposed, I don't know how they would listen to this podcast. But anyways, they all arrive at the same time and Bob, the therapist, arrives. He's got some fancy car. And so they make a benign comment about his car. And then they go in to start the session. But Bob, the therapist, ends up launching into probably at least a third of the session talking about this terrible breakup that he's had with, I don't know if it was his girlfriend or his wife. And so the focus of at least a third of the session is on the therapist and the therapist's broken relationship. And this couple is coming to see this therapist for marriage counseling. The point of the thread was, what should Mary do? I was really surprised. And it's a group practice. So for those of you that don't know what a group practice is, somebody owns a place where there are a lot of therapists that go, and they all are kind of under this primary therapist or administrator or manager. So it's not just one therapist who's working for themselves. They're working for somebody else in this practice. Is that an okay description of a group practice, Jen?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So in the comments, should Mary talk to the therapist? Should Mary talk to the practice owner? And what struck me is there were quite a few therapists that just said that Mary and John should just move on to another therapist, that the therapist knows that he did something wrong. He probably doesn't want unsolicited feedback, kind of that go along to get along attitude. And I want to be honest, but I'm so afraid. I was really appalled when I heard that. And what came up for me is, as therapists and for me as a coach, I want to empower my clients to speak their truth. And when somebody violates their boundaries, their time, their space, their money, that you have a right to use your voice and say, hey, this wasn't okay. This also makes me wonder if you're the right therapist for me because you're spewing about your unhealthy, unhappy relationship. And I'm here to, there are a lot of things about this that I think deserve being voiced. And to hear therapists saying, just let it go, you don't need to say anything, it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's just what my truth is. And the reason why I wanted to talk about it with you today, Jen, and what I'm hoping for the listener, that if you're a client, to really empower you, that if there's something that's going on in your session with your therapist is showing up late, they're being distracted during your session, they're sharing too much about themselves, you're wanting them to be more engaged, that as a client, you have a right to say something And as therapists, we're human, especially in this time that you and I haven't been recording, Jen. I've been grieving. There have been family things going on, health things going on. And some days I'm not my best. What I try and do with my clients, and I'd like to believe that it works, is if I'm having a day where I'm off, that I will start out by saying, I want to let you know I'm feeling a little bit tired today. I'm a little bit fidgety. I have some things going on. I think I'm here for you. I've had a couple clients that I've said, if you feel like this is not good enough for you, let me know and I'll reschedule with you. I always want the client to feel really empowered, and I want clients to know that this is a partnership. But we weren't taught this when we went through school. Not many therapists know how to do this. I have some clients that are therapists, and when I meet with them for the first time and tell them you can turn off the camera, you can eat, you can do whatever you want if I upset you, and they're kind of shocked that a therapist is doing this. So I don't want anybody to feel shame. I have a charge on this and I own that, but this is how we educate ourselves, is by talking about it. So I'd love to give you a chance to share.
So much there. So you and I are on the same page, really, with disclosing things to our clients. And I think part of why this might rub me the wrong way, and I did not see the post, might be because it gives that kind of skillful self-disclosure a bad name. Like, this is why historically therapists were told not to say word one about themselves, not to disclose anything.
How not to self-disclose.
Right. And it's so funny. It's like in life, every decision we make has like its pros and cons. So part of the pro of having that be a firm rule is that this kind of stuff didn't happen. And of course, part of the con, in my opinion, is it kind of took away some of our humanity and kind of gave rise to this idea that it's almost like a guru type of thing. Like, this person you're going to go see has it all figured out and you don't. And that hierarchy, or that unfair kind of, I think therapy works best when it's humanized and, the empathy of like, yeah, me too. It's really challenging to be a human being. And there's no relationship that doesn't have its challenges. So back to what you were talking about, though. Like, this was an example of not a skillful self-disclosure.
And using the client's paid time for the therapist to vent about things that were not meaningful or relevant or salient to the couple. That's a waste.
Absolutely. And it's not even like, I have some clients, they're so dear. Like, they do want to check in on me, and they might ask, how things have been going. And we may be spending a little bit of their time talking about me, but they lead that. And I do it because it's connective and it's relational and it's not burdensome, right? I'm not asking the client to hold space for me. I'm allowing the client to know a little bit about me, and I'm answering their questions.
Right. And with that, it's a measured amount of sharing. It's not like you go into a 20-minute diatribe about, the frustrations of moving or things getting lost. I just want to clarify that we can share information in a measured, appropriate, healthy way that helps our clients feel connected without, like you said, burdening them, or being very clear about what our intention is.
Yeah. And it's important when we make a mistake, like the therapists on the feed were kind of pointing out, that we invite our clients. One of my favorite parenting questions, and I think this would work in this case, is, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah.
And I know I do this anytime, not anytime, but a lot of the times when I'm late. What was that like for you? I'm open to hearing. And this is where, if you can release self-defensiveness and not take it personally, even though you have to take personal accountability for something, you really just open a wide space to hear what that experience was like for that person. And I do front load that in therapy. So especially when I do IFS and parts, and I'm like, if you have a part that comes out and just wants to say, bleepity bleep, Jen, bring it, because it keeps a purity. And of course, I wouldn't indulge someone becoming abusive, but speaking for that part of them, if I've said something evocative, it's really important to keep the water clear between us.
Absolutely.
And I think that is a skill that a good therapist would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think a lot of what this couple what Mary might do would hinge on is she going to continue to work with this therapist?
They decided not to return to the therapist, and maybe that was an important point to mention, but do they say something to the therapist? And I think that was an important piece of information that I left out. I think it's really important to communicate why you're leaving. And although this isn't where I want to focus for this episode, if Bob is really a skilled therapist and just like sometimes we just come unhinged, like sometimes it happens, that there is a way to come back from that and to not charge John and Mary for that session, and to have maybe even another complimentary session to allow them to process what it was like for them and to talk about what they need from Bob and for Bob to make amends. And if they had a really strong therapeutic alliance and Bob just happened to just lose his stuff for that one unique moment, that you can come back from that.
1,000%. That's what attachment is, right? It's rupture and repair.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too many of us feel like a rupture, that's the end, that's it. But if you can venture that authenticity, and the thing is, you have to be able to stand discomfort, right? Like you have to be able to stand making the other person perhaps uncomfortable, being uncomfortable yourself. And but absolutely, you could come back from that.
Yeah, provided that there was something meaningful there to start out with. I saw something recently that has really resonated with me, and it said, the goal of therapy is not to feel better. The goal of therapy is to learn to tolerate discomfort. And I think that I see you nodding your head. I think there's so much power in that because we know how to feel good. What we're not comfortable with is how do we manage conflict? How do we manage discomfort? How do we create safety and security and softness for us in that? And what I'd really like to talk about is for the people that feel like, ooh, I couldn't say anything, even if they decided to end therapy, what is it that goes on that makes it really challenging to know that you have a right to have your voice? And if you were married and you wrote a letter to Bob or an email or something, how could you be okay with that? And really, I guess this is where I feel passionate, and I wonder if I'm sometimes insensitive, because there is so much power to giving that part of you that never had a voice to go, you need to stop this. This isn't okay. This was my time. This was not your time. This was really upsetting to me. It's a question like whether you're the right therapist for me. Those are all things that would be okay to express. And when we have a hard time expressing that, it's often because as children, there was no place for us. We would say we felt hurt, something didn't feel good, and somebody would minimize it. Oh, it's okay. You're crying. Stop crying. I'll give you something to cry about. You're making a big deal out of things. So we don't even learn that it's okay to know what we're thinking and feeling and to express it.
Yeah. I work a lot with people, and I've worked with this on myself, on empowerment, on sovereignty as like your own person. And I think it's about boundary work. And it's about allowing that there's two experiences happening, and it's that intimacy, right? Intimacy. I'm going to share something with you, and we're not fighting over like whose one reality gets to prevail. We're letting each other know what our projections, wounds, like all of it, our lived experience is like. And it's not a shared experience, right? Now, back to one of my favorite topics is that existential loneliness. So how do we break through that loneliness? Is we let each other know, and we take the risk of doing that so that we can know each other better. I think about it in a developmental context. When children have like parallel play.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you explain what that is, just in case people don't know?
Yeah. So there's a developmental stage where children don't really play together cooperatively or share. So the next step would be sharing like an imaginal space. But before that, children do what's called parallel play. They play near each other. There may be some acknowledgement of each other, but they are not sharing a world together. The next developmental stage, maybe they're playing house and there's like an agreement. Will you be the baby and I'll be the grown-up, or you be the dog or I'll be the this. They are co-creating a shared imaginary world. I'm smiling because I have such fond memories of my own children doing this. I have memories of myself doing this, right? But before that stage, there's this parallel play. And it just got me thinking, like, how often are we doing these like parallel plays where we are not working on co-creating like a shared experience where you have to bring it. You have to be authentic and vulnerable for someone to know you. And that's why I love acknowledging the existential loneliness. And we have to work towards sharing what our point of view is, what our stories are, what our attachment wounds are, because they inform all of our reactivity, like all of our reactions to things. And I love the quote that all judgment is really like a confession because it's so loaded with personal history.
Mm-hmm.
So back to being authentic, showing up in relationships. And the therapy space is a great place to risk some of that. Like that's what we're here for.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not above making mistakes. Self-disclosure is really, I think it's really important that we reveal some of our personal biases because the people who are hiring us, our clients, like sort of deserve to know who it is that they're talking to.
Sure.
And this idea that we are a blank slate is just not possible.
Right.
Right. So I'd rather have an acknowledged bias than thinking that I don't have any because I'm blind to my own biases.
Right. I think that it's hard though, because not all therapists have done their own work, and you can't know what you don't know. And you and I are very much on the same page, and we've done a lot of our own work and continue to do our own work. And so I think that we bring this richness and, I don't know, this freshness to the work that we do with our clients because of how present you and I are to our own experiences and really do our best to create safety for our clients to have that rich experience. I think so much of the healing happens between the client and the therapist or coach because you get modeled what you may not have gotten growing up, and you know that it's possible. And then if you know that it's possible in this relationship, you want to express that in your other relationships, and you know it's possible. But sometimes some of the things that I see and hear from clients that we aren't taught this stuff in school. And so we've got to be willing to do our own work beyond what we get in school, unless you went to an amazing school. And how do we create that safety? So if you're somebody who is seeing a therapist, or say for Mary, well, Mary's a therapist. I don't know. I guess I'm wanting to get a little bit more concrete about what are the barriers that come up if you want to talk to your therapist or somebody about something, but you're afraid to. Can you think about, what are you afraid of? They're going to get mad at me. They're going to fire me. What are those things? And then can you walk yourself through it and then imagine the discomfort that comes up? I think it's something that you might have to do with somebody, but I'm just trying to want to give the listener some tangible steps, because my experience is that many HSPs, the dysregulation caused by potential conflict is so overwhelming that they often don't want to do it. I'm not saying everybody, and I'm kind of like tell everybody your feelings and just feel empowered. So
with discernment, right? Because there are some people that don't really want that, and we have to be respectful, right? Like this is kind of our jam. It's not everybody's jam, but identifying that there's a mismatch in that value set.
Sure.
I mean, one tangible thing that I like to do sometimes is have a conversation with someone, kind of a meta conversation. So like go up a couple levels in awareness and have a discussion about handling conflict. How do we handle conflict? What is it like when we have something difficult to bring to each other? It's like when I work with parents sometimes, and typically with teenagers, what comes up is that someone's lying, right? And so instead of focusing on the lie and all that comes up with that, it's like, can we focus on like what makes it hard to tell the truth? Which is what you're saying, right? What are the barriers?
Right.
When I was a baby therapist, right, developmentally, a large part of my education was ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And those guys are on this. They are like, the whole point is not to feel better. I'm curious who said that quote that you mentioned earlier about therapy's not about feeling better. It's about experiencing discomfort with equanimity or grace, right? Because there's so much wisdom and value in understanding it. And if we throw in self-compassion, it's a powerful combination for growth and making space for our discomfort. The whole crux of ACT is psychological health, is psychological flexibility. And what we're looking for is experiential avoidance. Like, what are the experiences that we don't want? And what are all the permutations we go through to avoid feeling that? And it's often those things that are targeted, because that's what's problematic. And it's safe to have our feelings. Like, that's a big part of it. Just to go really broad again, I think philosophically it's important, if we're pathologizing. I know sometimes the label, even if it is pathologizing, is a comfort to people because it helps them understand themselves and what's going on. But it is a paradigm, like it is a lens, and we could just as easily use it's learned, right? Or a trauma-informed lens.
Right, right. I love looking at the need too. What is the need? And often what so many of us didn't get is feeling seen and heard. I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. And how often we feel like that's not okay and we minimize. And I think if you are assigned female at birth, so many of the messages that we get are about not making people uncomfortable. And when there's conflict, or nobody ever tells a man that they're being bossy or controlling, that men are assertive, but women are being bossy and controlling. Or if we say something that makes somebody uncomfortable, we're silenced. It's funny. My family, we went to get gas the other day at Costco, and my son and I went to walk over to the store to get something, and my husband stayed in the van, and there was this car that was stopped because he was holding up all the traffic going out of the parking lot and out onto the street because he wanted to go into one lane. So the people behind him couldn't go by him and go into the other lane, and the flow of traffic could keep going. So I just gestured like, hey, there's a bunch of room there, you can go. And he got out of his car and he just got really upset. And he and my son had a verbal altercation. And everything was fine. I'm not sure that that's the safest thing to do with people that, carry guns around and lose their mind. But I also felt like the people behind you have a right for you to go like, hey, I'm going to wait. Go ahead in front of me. But it's funny. I didn't say anything, but I thought it's interesting that my son, as a young man, felt comfortable going, dude, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, don't make waves. Just be polite. And how much of my life have I been conditioned to just let it go, don't make anybody uncomfortable, don't get upset. And I really think that we get a lot of socialization for this. And I love that bumper sticker that says, it's about women being disruptors and making history. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well-mannered women.
Well-mannered women rarely make history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And I think that that's a part of it too, that, what if I say something and therapist Bob gets angry or upset, or it hurts his feelings, or maybe he was having a bad day. It's like, that competing needs, he can be having a bad day and I can be really upset and frustrated that this was not a good use of my time in this therapy session. And can I trust that there's safety? And in an ideal situation, therapist Bob would have created safety and said, how will I know if I do something that upsets you? What's the most comfortable way for you to let me know? I always do that with clients when we first start therapy or coaching, because I want people to be able to tell me, or say, if you can't tell me in the moment, shoot me an email. Tell me what happened, because I want to create safety and be here for you. But A, we have to know what we're thinking and feeling. B, we have to know that we have a right to express it. And C, we need to be able to tolerate what might happen, the dysregulation that may happen. But I can tell you that the more I do this work, and I've been bumping up against a lot of things, then I'm finding that I don't get as dysregulated anymore. It's still kind of upsetting to me, but I don't get that dysregulation, and I'm getting clearer and clearer that whatever's happening is not okay. Like that, it's not okay, and I need to say something. And so I really want to hold that vision and that hope for people. And I don't know, maybe there are people that just, it's easier to not do it. I want to be respectful, knowing that I'm much for the say something and let's use our voices to heal.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge the pervasiveness of that conditioning as, assigned female at birth people. It's so baked in, and it comes from somewhere. A question I often will ask myself is and believe me, I have been really, for a lot of my life, very intimidated, scared to speak up. Whose feelings am I going to hurt? And I guess I just want to point out that historically, women's narratives, other minority group, there have been silencing. There has, we are sort of, and it's in our language. It's baked into our language, the language of kings, as Marshall Rosenberg said. Like, it's really built into all these like building blocks of how we shape our worlds and shape our thinking. And the fact now that we're even consciously able to hold space for two different narratives that are not competing, they coexist, and that they're different perspectives and that they're each valid. And that's what a lot of feminism is, right? It's like, who's silenced, who's not at the table, whose voice is not being invited. So the flip side of that, the question that I ask myself a lot is, who's benefiting from my silence? What status quo is this keeping locked down? And really identifying. So we tend to catastrophize as humans, right? Just, oh gosh, something bad is going to happen. And the way I like to deal with catastrophizing is asking for specificity, because often you grab, it's like, I see it as like this, I picture catastrophizing as this giant cloud of like, dun, 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 yeah, something bad is going to happen. And you can't deal with a cloud. So you I see my hand kind of going in and grabbing a raindrop of like specificity. And you look at that and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can deal with that. There are resources now to deal with that. And they may be resources that didn't exist for our mothers, grandmothers, great grandmothers. This is where I love putting ourselves in a historical story, in a historical context.
Yeah.
And I think anytime silence and competing narratives come to play, we're also looking at power. We're looking at dynamics.
Yeah.
And yeah, so contextualize yourself again. Don't decontextualize yourself and wonder what the heck's wrong with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And like you said, looking at all of the marginalized communities and the overlay and how much of it's not safe to say anything because you're in a marginalized group and your right to exist is already very oppressed. I was thinking about this situation with therapist Bob. So who benefits by keeping the silence? And it's a power differential. Therapist Bob has the power because therapist Bob could get mad. Therapist Bob could retaliate. Therapist Bob may yell at me. And what we forget is the client is in the position of power. That's your money. It's your time. You choose who you get to see. You get to choose if you feel like your practitioner gets you, that they've got your back, that they're creating safety for you, that they're going at your pace, that they're talking about the things that are of value to you, that they don't have an agenda.
It's a co-created world.
Right, right.
Right.
So it's possible that you may or may not have that, but if you haven't tested it and the person in theoretical power hasn't created safety for you to start exploring that, then we kind of continue to wear those glasses of, I can't say what I'm thinking and feeling because it's going to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And really, the therapeutic coaching environment should, in theory, be the safest place in the world to really be seen and heard and to practice tools with someone who will be gentle and accepting and affirming and allowing you the discomfort in a really safe way.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, back as a baby therapist, we would call it pliance, like kind of like compliance. And to really watch the ways in which we may be kind of molding the experience and really inviting our clients to continue to be the expert on themselves. And we need them. Like if you and I are going to share a world, I need you to bring it. I need you to show up with me vulnerably, authentically. Yeah.
Yeah. And as the therapists and coaches, it's our job to model that. That's how we create the safety, is by modeling it. And just what we started out by talking about is when we're not doing well or we're struggling, if it's relevant and important, to share that in a very succinct way so that it doesn't take away. And I always ask clients, is that helpful? And if it's not, I don't need to share that information. But people almost always say, it just makes me feel so normal. I feel so validated.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we want. You want to feel like the person that you're seeing gets you, and it's not that they've got their life together and you're the one with the problems. I used to think when I was in therapy that when I wasn't struggling anymore, I'd be done. And I kept struggling and I couldn't understand why. And if somebody just would have said like, that's part of this, it's part of the experience, man, it would have been so much different.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And you know what we know from like a growth mindset, if your growth game is strong, like you're always going to be on the edge of something that you're pondering and uncertain about.
Right. And that's an okay place to be.
Yes. And that's
really an okay place to be.
That's human, right? That's life. That it's, when you run out of problems to solve, I think, it's like game over.
Yeah. Well, I think that if we're chasing happiness and ease, then there's frustration always with the struggle. But if the focus is the struggle is okay, and that's the average part, that allows us to bounce into the joy and the ease, and then we drop back into the discomfort and the struggle, and it's a back and forth. But I think that when we think that we're supposed to not be in the struggle, then there's just resistance and frustration and feeling like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have. Anything that you have?
I am sure that this is a conversation to be continued, but we should probably take a break now.
Yeah. So listeners, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, shoot me an email, unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Jen, do you want emails if anybody has any thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I would love that, because add in there, if we have your permission to bring it, answer it in a future podcast.
Yeah. Jen, what's your email?
It's jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com.
Nice to be back recording with you again.
Oh my gosh.
Hopefully.
Yes. I'm just so happy to be back. It was really, that was a long time. That was a long break.
It was. And often we'd talk the day of recording, is it going to work for you today? No, I'm not up for it. Do you want to reschedule? We'll try. Let's not. It was okay. We got through it.
It was. I really thank you for all of, your grace and spaciousness and compassion and tuning in.
You're welcome. And sometimes I wasn't up for it either. So I think you and I are good about pushing through, but I think it's also okay to go like, we got to just give it a rest.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great day.
You too, my friend.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know, how was that? What do you think? Did that resonate for you? Did I say anything that upset you, frustrated you, shamed you, pissed you off? If I did, it's okay. I want to get a little bit more bold in that way. If you heard things that resonated for you and you want to work with either Jen or with me, we would love to talk with you, see if we're a good fit. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com, or you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. We both rock at communication, vulnerability, boundaries, relationships. I love the skill set that Jen and I have, and we love working with y'all to help you really not only deal with the discomfort, but to build skills and tools so that you can be living the life that you want. And sometimes there are some bumps there. I hope you're doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.